Okay, welcome to Rules. We are setting the calendar for tomorrow, and I see we have one person on the wall. And if you will, present your bills. Will somebody text Andy Welch and tell him he needs to be here?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So you know that Speaker, a couple of years ago, created the Military Affairs Working Group, and this body presented and passed 23 new laws to help our military. The DOD, I've got a letter here, and I'll submit it to when I get to the floor of the House, has put a letter together asking us to do just a few more things to make Georgia completely green, military-friendly state. So the first bill I bring to you, sir, is HB 25. It's modified open rule. It's very briefly, there's a federal service member civil relief act that helps members with court proceedings, default judgments, evictions, foreclosures, loss of insurance coverages when they're deployed overseas. And this bill would fill a couple gaps in the protections that the Pentagon likes us to fill that they can't do on the federal basis because they can't, the current gridlock there. So all it does is extend the federal protections to Reserve and National Guard if on orders for 90 days to a place where that service is not available, and also includes a health spa provision. Do you have any questions, sir?
Are there questions?
Yes, sir. The second bill is HB.
Wait. Chairman Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Belton and I have discussed his bill, which of course is very good, and I think it's going to be great for our service members. However, you, Mr. Chairman, did catch one date reference in the line 54 area that needed to be changed. And as I mentioned, I've discussed that matter of a needed change with Representative Belton. And at the appropriate time, I would like the chair to entertain a motion for me to send that bill back to Judiciary so we can make a date adjustment in the bill.
This would be the appropriate time.
I so move.
All right, there's a motion second to recommit this to Judiciary to make a couple of technical corrections. Is there any objection? No objection. It's recommitted to Judiciary. Okay, Representative Belton, tell us about the rest of them.
Thank you, sir. The second bill is HB 26, Modified Structured Rule. This is a psychology compact with the Department of Defense would like us to put together. Representative Al Williams did a very sweeping bill about certificates. However, there's some health professions that you can't just do this with a certificate. You need to do it with a compact to allow spouses of service members to practice in Georgia. This applies to doctors, nurses, psychologists, physical therapists. This particular bill would put us into a psychology compact with a bunch of different states. We have over 200 different compacts that around the nation. This one be one for psychologists. 7 states have already passed this. 7 states are working on it right now, including our military competitors. What it would do is it would allow psychologists to come to Georgia and to practice telemedicine only, or in the case of like a hurricane or something like that, a psychologist could come to Georgia for 30 days only, face-to-face, and then put us into that compact so that they could practice psychology in Georgia. And again, this elevates the practice because of standardized best practices throughout the nation, and it allows for the ability to report bad actors throughout the compact. And one more thing. This passed actually last year unanimously at the House. It was a Joyce Chandler bill, but it was hung up in the Senate. We added one caveat that the Senate asked us to do. It created a background check requirement. This is something that the industry is going to as a standard anyway. And everyone who has a psychology compact degree or certificate in Georgia would not have to get the background check until they renew their license, which happens every 10 years.
Okay, Chairman Cooper, you have a question?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wait a minute, I didn't understand that last statement about, what is it, the psychologists don't have to get a background check for 10 years? Here in the
Right
state
now,
of Georgia?
they do not have to have a background check with fingerprints. With this bill, because the Senate wants this in there, does require, whenever a psychologist is renewing their license, that they get a background check with the fingerprints.
Okay, but it doesn't require psychologists coming into our state to have that automatically?
It would do that as well, yes.
It would do that?
Yes.
Okay, and are the other states, one of the problems that we're finding is in some of the compacts, they are not sharing information about orders against them and problems they've had in other states. In this compact, and in the next one, do they share with our boards information, and do they share that kind of information back and forth?
Yes, they do, Chairman.
You're absolutely sure?
Well, that's what they say, yeah.
Okay.
That's what they told me.
Thank you.
Representative Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to point out, thank you so much for this bill, Chairman. One of the things that happens is I just lost a 30-year veteran because of licensing problems. He was a psychologist at Wynn Army Hospital. So he's now gone and practicing in Florida because it was such a hassle in Georgia. It was and one thing about a military person, an officer, every background in the world has been run on them. And believe me, when you have a problem, you are out of the military. You're gone because they do a thorough and complete job.
Thank you, Representative Williams.
Representative Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, how about the educational equality or equalization between states? These folks are coming in from intrastate. Their educational background meets what we have here in Georgia?
That's my understanding. And again, they'd only be able to come here for 30 days, or they can also telemedicine from.
Right. I don't care if it's for a day. I mean, they need to be qualified under the laws of the state of Georgia. And going back to Representative Cooper's question, this has been a real problem with other professions when they leave one state, escape and come to Georgia before the rulings come down on them, and it gets lost in transition. So we've got people practice here because they're escaping from other states. So I hope you'll check on that. And
Yes, sir, I'll
make
check
sure
on that,
about
sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Representative Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Belton, I just want to follow up on Chairman Hawkins' question. Are you fairly certain, can you say with a great deal of certainty, that the regulations and the requirements are at least as stringent for these people coming in and match what we have in the state of Georgia?
I will get that question. My understanding is that it's very, very regulated. That this actually creates more regulations for them, and but I do not know for a fact that is the case, sir.
Yeah, I know that it's probably much different in California than it is in Georgia or whatever, and I just want to make certain everyone's on the same page.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
I'll find that answer.
All right, no more questions. Move on to your next one.
I do know this, that I have a letter here from the Board of Professional Licensing Division that they're saying that they're actually increasing their regulations in order to abide by the regulations created by the compact. So from the board's perspective, the psychology board, that we're actually upping our game in order to meet the requirements. The last bill, sir, is HB 39, Modified Structured Rule. It's a similar compact situation. It's a physical therapy compact. This one's not quite as stringent. There's 19 states that are doing it already. 3 states are working on it, including our military competitors. And in this case, it's not just telemedicine, that they can come to Georgia and practice their profession with telemedicine and also with on a more of a long-term basis.
Chairman Cooper.
all the questions that we've asked and been asked on the floor, I would say again, background checks. And the other thing is there a requirement in the nursing requirement that passed, and there's a problem with it, so the compact doesn't want to go with along what we put on it, but there's a requirement that our board ignored where we will know who's coming into our state, and if they become permanent citizens of our state, they have to get a license in our state from our state board. Is that in there so that we know who's practicing in our state? I know that people in the border areas, think for convenience in the military, but we are dealing with people's lives, and sometimes in the rush to do something that seems easy, we may be letting people into our state that have problems. And maybe there would be a better way if we worked with our boards to solve this close counters and get people in quicker that are on our borders and would meet our state regulations. So if you could find out the
Yes,
answer
ma'am, I'll
to
find
that.
that information out.
Representative Hawkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are the boards asking you to carry these bills? Are these board bills?
The Department of Defense is asking me to carry these bills, but the boards are in complete favor, and they've written letters to that effect.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Williams.
So, point of clarification. In all of the military licensure bills, there is no waiver of any requirements because you go through the same background checks. It's just that you're able to start, and if there's a problem, then you lose your ability to practice or to do whatever it is you do. The background, any of the requirements Georgia has is not waived. It's temporary to keep people like a nurse I had, who after 6 months of waiting to be licensed after being a nurse at Fort Hood in Texas, she gave up and went into another profession because it took 6 months and she still had not gotten anything. This does not waive any of the requirements. It's temporary until the requirements of background checks and other things that we do in Georgia is done.
Thank you, Representative Williams. I would like to add the Secretary of State is on board with all these changes. They do say that if they see that an applicant is a military spouse, they put them at the front of the line. But this still is a line, as Representative Williams talks about. And a lot of times I moved every 2 years. So you move to a place, you wait 6 months, you finally get your license, you're there for a year, and then you have to start moving again. So it makes it almost very, very difficult for these military spouses to operate. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Cooper.
Sorry.
Representative, however, these are not just military compacts. They apply to everybody, correct?
That's correct.
So everybody doesn't meet the stringent. And it's my understanding, because I have been on it about the Board of Nursing, nursing license were being issued in about 72 hours unless there was something questionable in the person's background. And that's where the slowdown came, if there was something questionable. So that was a holdup, and we have gotten it down to a very short period of time unless there is some indication there's a problem.
Thank you, ma'am.
Chairman Belton, you're fortunate to be the only one on the wall today, so that gives us plenty of time to think up questions for you. And I have two, and I mentioned those to you before we met today. Number one, I noticed in reading this bill that the commission has the ability to issue regulations that will be applicable in any of the member compact states and will have the force of law in those states. And the second thing is similar, that the commission has the ability to assess dues, which then the member states, and there's no cap and no parameters for it. And my question is this similar to what other compacts that we've entered into do, or is this an anomaly, or do you know the answer?
Yes, sir. Again, as I stated to you before, thank you for your time, is from my understanding that what the language I got was from the Department of Defense that is used by all these different compacts, but I will get you that answer before tomorrow, sir.
Okay. Any other questions? I see none. Thank you, Mr. Belton.
Ask for his favorable approval. Thank you.
Okay, here's the status. Mr. Belton has 3 bills. We're holding 2 of them to get questions answered, and 1 of them is sent back to Judiciary. We've got 2 other bills on the consideration calendar. Neither one of their sponsors are present today, and so we will have no rules calendar tomorrow. We're adjourned.